You know, I was thinking to myself the other day, Yu-Gi-Oh is one of the most unique card games with over 11,000 individual cards, and this game, unlike others, does not have any rotation system. You're just able to use every single card since the conception of Yu-Gi-Oh, which makes it really interesting when you're trying to deck build, because oftentimes you can find some hidden gems across the card pool to utilize for a certain format. And a lot of times these cards were previously regarded as absolute trash and unplayable. And I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at Yu-Gi-Oh history to identify some of these cards that were classified as unplayable but became extremely broken. Starting off with the spell card Soul Taker. This is a spell card that says target one face-up monster your opponent controls, destroy it, then your opponent gains 1,000 life points. Now, despite the fact that this card was released as a secret rare, it didn't see play for years because of the fact that your opponent gained life points and the fact that it actually targeted the monster it tries to destroy. This makes it easy so your opponent knows which monster you're going after so they can respond, or they could even negate it with a card like Titanial, Princess of Camellias, a monster that allowed you to negate card effects that targeted your cards. But on top of all of this was the fact that there already existed better cards in the card pool, cards that were strictly better when you compared them one-to-one with Soul Taker. For example, Smashing Ground, which everyone played because it destroyed an opponent's monster with the highest defense without targeting it. But over 4 years later, Soul Taker started seeing play suddenly overnight because of the release of the Dragons Collide structure deck and a certain game mechanic that interacted very favorably with Soul Taker and how it was worded. So this structure deck brought Chaos Dragons to life, a powerful deck that was actually tier 1 upon release. And one of the main selling points of this deck in particular was their signature monster, Light Pulsar Dragon. Light Pulsar Dragon says when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can target a level 5 or higher Dark Dragon monster in your graveyard and resurrect it back to the field. And the deck would utilize the Light Pulsar Dragon loop by resurrecting the Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon in the graveyard every time Light Pulsar Dragon left the table, and then use the Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon's effect to bring back Light Pulsar, so it's basically an infinite loop. Except for the fact that Light Pulsar Dragon was worded a particular way. The text says when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you can do this action, which utilized the old version of the Yu-Gi-Oh card text that could miss timing. Yeah, this was before they introduced the if clause to the game. And cards back in the day that said when X happens, do Y means the card specifically has to fulfill the X as the last thing on the chain. But cards that say if X happens, then do Y cannot miss timing, which is why they started printing future cards with the if clause. And because Soul Taker says then your opponent gains 1,000 life points, the last thing happening is the opponent gaining the life points and not that monster being destroyed, meaning Light Pulsar Dragon actually misses timing when it's destroyed by Soul Taker. This was a strange interaction that Soul Taker specifically dealt with, unlike cards like Smashing Ground, which would destroy Light Pulsar and trigger the effect in the graveyard. And so a lot of the pro players caught on quickly before the first event where Light Pulsar Dragon was legal, but somehow word got out during the Friday of the major event, and this card shot up to $15 to $20 for a common. And the secret rare was well over 100. Speaking of older Yu-Gi-Oh cards, I've actually had this shirt courtesy of today's sponsor, Into the AM, for some time now, and it still feels like it's brand new. This is pretty much my go-to shirt for locos because it's really comfy and I can just throw it on, plus it has a pretty sick design. I usually cycle through a different graphic tee for every locos, and I've gotten a lot of compliments on each one. They also have a plethora of other everyday wardrobe options, so you can definitely pick and choose. Actually, funny story from locals the other week, my opponent was playing Murmo and hand looped me for 5 cards and set up double toad, effectively FTKing me. And then he laughed in my face. But he still gave me a compliment about my shirt, so I wasn't as salty. Yay. I also got some pants from them that are really stretchy and easy to wear, especially at a larger event where you're just running around the whole time. I like wearing a color that corresponds with the deck that I'm playing. For example, since I'm playing Raizio with a lot of hand traps, it makes sense to wear a lighter shirt to correspond with all the hand traps. But they also have some green ones, so if you're playing a spell heavy deck like Sky Strikers, this might be an option. And best of all, they're having a humongous sale on their website right now. So if you guys want to check it out and get some awesome premium made graphic tees, click on my link in the description below for 10% off. And because of this, Soul Taker became a mainstay staple in a lot of side decks. Up next is a card that no one would have ever imagined to be remotely playable. Horus the Black Flame Dragon, no, not the retrained Horus cards, I'm talking about the original Horus the Black Flame Dragons, was a series of cards released in Soul of the Duelist, a set that came out in 2004, at the time of which these cards were already unplayable. The Horus monsters have 3 different iterations, the level 4, the level 6, and the level 8, with the level 8 being the only one that has a good effect, which allows you to negate spell cards. These cards were all a part of the level mechanic, a gimmick that didn't really catch on. They're supposed to level up into each other over the course of a couple of turns, but the level 4 one was so terrible, we'll just throw that one out of the equation. Now obviously this was a really powerful effect, but required a lot of setup. You would have to tribute summon for the level 6 Horus and then destroy something by battle. Not exactly easy because he only had a measly 2300 attack, and at the time you'd rather tribute summon something with instant impact like a Jinzo or a Caius the Shadow Monarch. But why was this card suddenly good in the year 2013 and played by well-known player Patrick Holben in his 2013 National Championship winning deck list? Fast forward to the Spellbook Dragon Ruler format where only 2 decks were playable. This was a tier 0 format with 2 of the strongest decks across Yu-Gi-Oh history. Dragon Rulers, as the name would imply, utilized a series of elemental dragons that could spam the board and set up powerful Xyz monsters, while Spellbooks completely relied on a series of spell cards to set up the Jowgen or Kaiku lock, backed by some powerful spellbooks that could disrupt your opponent. It just so happened that Horus the Black Flame Dragon level 8 spell card negation effect would be highly effective against spellbooks, for the fact that you can actually search the Horus cards off of Blaster, Dragon Ruler of Infernos. When each of the Dragon Rulers were banished, you could search your deck for a corresponding dragon with the same attribute, and Blaster, being fire, allowed you to search your deck for Horus the Black Flame Dragon level 6. And by tributing a monster to summon out Horus, you could then swing over any spellbook weenie and tag out for the level 8 dragon in the end phase, thereby locking out your opponent completely from playing any spellbook cards for the rest of the game. Now, tribute summoning Horus would be a bit of a task, so players actually combined it with Puppet Plant. By discarding Puppet Plant from your hand, you could take control of an opposing spellcaster monster like Jowgen the Spiritualist, which was locking you out from special summoning any Dragon Rulers. Then once you controlled that spellcaster monster, you could tribute it over with the level 6 Horus and swing over the remaining helpless spellbook monster, allowing you to out the Jowgen lock, but also set up Horus the Black Flame Dragon level 8. Yeah, this was the one and only time that this pseudo-god card was playable in the history of the game. Now, in that same format, there were a lot of other tech cards that were dug up that hadn't seen play in over a decade. Anti-Spell Fragrance was first released in 2003 as a promotional card, a part of a PC game. This card was never played because previously the game was slow enough where players would just set traps and there was a lot of passing back and forth, so locking your opponent out of spells for a single turn didn't mean anything. But with Dragon Rulers and Spellbooks, the game got really fast, and if you could lock out Spellbooks from playing spell cards for a turn, you could easily OTK on the next turn. And for the first time ever, this Floodgate card became seriously powerful. Ever since then, spell cards have only increased in power, which is why Anti-Spell Fragrance is limited to 1 on the ban list and should honestly probably be banned. At the time, luckily, in addition to the secret rare printing, there were 2 other reprints. There was a rare copy as well as a common that were available through the tournament packs, so players had access to the card. But it still knocked it up to a couple of dollars even for the common. Historically, tier 0 formats like this have opened a lot of doors to deck building, because when everyone's playing the same decks, players want to do everything in their power to find even the slightest bit of edge over their opponents. Which is also why this decade-old card called Non-Aggression Zone saw play. You would have to set it for a turn before activating it during your standby phase, but by discarding a card, you lock your opponent out of summoning any monsters for the rest of their next turn, which effectively means if you resolve this card, you win the duel. But players quickly moved on to Vanity's Emptiness, which is pretty much better in every single way. DNA Surgery was another Floodgate favorite against Spellbooks. This card turns all monsters into a certain type, and because the majority of Spellbook cards required them to control a spellcaster monster, by flipping DNA Surgery and calling something like dragons, you would lock your opponent out from playing, period. I never thought I would see the day where DNA Surgery became a $20 common. This next one happens to be an extremely bizarre one that didn't even have an effect. Dark Witch is a really obscure card, and you might be wondering how on earth would this card ever be playable. In 2016, with the release of the new Monarch support, instead of capitalizing on Domain of the Monarchs, some players went against the grain and played an extra deck in their Monarchs. And part of the appeal for playing extra deck Monarchs was to take advantage of the Brilliant Fusion engine. Brilliant Fusion could summon out Gem Knight Seraphinite, a powerful fusion monster that served as tribute fodder, but also allowed you to have an additional normal summon, which was really crucial for a deck like Monarchs that was heavily reliant on the sole normal summon that they had each turn. Brilliant Fusion allows you to fusion summon by using the materials directly from your deck. And since Gem Knight Seraphinite required a Gem Knight monster plus any light monster, by sending both Dark Witch and a copy of Gem Knight Lazuli, you would trigger Lazuli's effect to add back a normal monster from your graveyard back to your hand. And Dark Witch was a perfect card for this that checked all of the boxes. Number 1, it was a normal monster. Number 2, it was a light attribute monster. And number 3, it was a fairy type monster, which was really important to play around the popular sided rivalry of the Warlords. Seraphinite herself was a fairy monster, which would allow you to still tribute summon the Dark Witch, and then use Return of the Monarchs to add a copy of Aether the Heavenly Monarch, who was also a fairy type. So you could keep playing under rivalry. Dark Witch was also a level 5, which is really important because you wanted a monster that you could tribute summon to trigger the effect of Return of the Monarchs. And being level 5 was especially important because Prime Monarch was a level 5 light type that you could use to Xe summon alongside Dark Witch to make something like Constellar Pleiades. And at the end of the day, there were only 2 monsters that would fulfill all of these conditions, one being Dark Witch with a higher attack, and the other being Ocubeam, who had the less attack and was pretty ugly. And last but not least is another obscure card that was released in the year 2002, but did not see play until the year 2018. Kaminari Attack is a fusion monster that happened to be the only Thunder fusion monster that was special summonable off of instant fusion. And when we got the brand new Thunder Dragon archetype in Soul Fusion, their signature boss monster, Thunder Dragon Titan, required you to banish an onboard fusion Thunder monster plus another Thunder monster from your hand, which was made pretty difficult, except you could cheat out Kaminari Attack thanks to instant fusion. And for the first couple of months, the sole printing of Kaminari Attack was the MRD version that retailed for about 20 bucks because it was so old. Yeah, some of these older fusion monsters are really bizarre and pricey because they're one of a kind. So those are some examples of cards that were really old but saw play years later, even when you would never expect them to. Can you guys think of any other older cards that saw competitive play? Let us know in the comments below. Also, final reminder to get your premium made graphic tees from Into the AM. Click on my link in the description below for 10% off.